Mark Hughes. Welcome to Disability Viewpoints. My special co-host this time out is Joan Willshire, and she's got some interesting guests coming up. My guest today will be Charlene Guggisberg from DEED, Department of Economic Development, and she's going to talk about teaching the vision impaired how to cook, and it can be done at home. And they also have a job coach whereby they teach professional vision impaired chefs how to cook. So it'll be interesting. That'll be my guest. Joan, who's your guest today, and welcome.
Well, I have a fantastic issue we're going to be talking about today, and that's 504 civil rights legislation, because it's under attack. So I've got Steve Schmidt from the Disability Law Center, and then I've got David Perry, who's a historian and writer, and a father with a son with a disability that's going to talk about this as well.
Well, that sounds great. And so that'll be our show for today. It should be an action-packed 28 minutes and 30 seconds. We hope you'll stay tuned. Disability Viewpoints is coming up next. Welcome back to Disability Viewpoints. I'm Mark Hughes. With me is Charlene Guggisberg from DEED, Department of Economic Development and Employment. And Charlene, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your career path to where you got to be today, and then we'll proceed with other questions.
Okay, sure. I lost my sight as a young child due to cancer, which is retinoblastoma, and I was raised by my parents to believe in myself, and if I couldn't do it the way that anybody sighted was doing it, then I, as a blind person, had to figure out a different way, and there was no excuse to get out of work. So growing up on a farm, there's always plenty of work, and as time went on, I eventually went to college and got a degree in occupational therapy. And a lot of occupational therapy is getting people to do things for themselves, figure out a way. Problem solving is a big part of it. And with any disability, whether it's blindness, hearing loss, or in a wheelchair, you often have to think, how can I get that same result accomplished? And so that was a nice base background to have from the college degree. And then I went on for several years to work in a hospital setting with people with brain tumors and strokes and different things like that. And then I eventually got into running the youth programs for blind teenagers and children. And then I went on to be a vendor for the state. And with these jobs was all like either teaching Braille, teaching adaptive cooking and cleaning, especially teenagers. They a lot of times got out of things because they were blind or visually impaired. And then they came to my program and they found out that the party was over. It was time to start learning to do things. And of course, they got upset with me, and sometimes their parents even got upset with me. Even though they were sent there to learn, they thought I was being a little bit hard on them. And of course, you'd say, hey, listen, I'm doing it, and I don't see, so how do you think you get out of this? And then eventually, I left that job and was hired by State Services for the Blind, and I'm now the training coordinator there in the Senior Services Unit. And so it's a lot of the same things. I provide instructions to people on adaptive ways to continue to cook independently, to do the cleaning. Sometimes it's very basic sewing, and I'm talking about threading needles and sewing on buttons, but you know, getting involved in leisure activities, getting them encouraged to get out there, to use the white cane and not be afraid. You've lost your vision, but you're still you. And so sometimes that takes the push. I always tell people, you kind of need to be kind, and then there's times you have to say, okay, come on, enough's enough. Let's get on and live your life. You're still good. You've got a good health. Maybe your eyes don't work as well, but you can still do things.
Right. In all the years you've done it, what is the most rewarding thing that you've seen a person develop and go on to do just great, super things? What is the most rewarding thing you've seen in all the years?
I think the most rewarding thing is when it can be the simplest thing from somebody that when you first started working with them, they'd ask you if you'd like something to drink, and they'd say to someone else, go get her the water, go make her the coffee. Then suddenly you come to the door and they'll say, would you like some coffee? And they go into the kitchen and they're pouring it and bringing it to the table.
Right.
complete turnaround. I mean, I think, and of course, then you get the bigger things where they're, maybe the teenagers have finally said, I'm working now, I have a job, and I'm going out with friends. And these are sighted friends. They're mixing in. They're not thinking, yeah, I'm blind, but I don't have to stop hanging out with people. I don't have to stop going to school activities. And the same with seniors. You see that same thing, that they're back out playing cards and playing bingo and going on those, going shopping. When someone tells me I'm losing my vision, shopping's not fun anymore, and I'm like, oh, we can definitely cure that.
Right. And so when the kitchen was planned for your operation at the state to expand or move on, were there any apprehension as far as being afraid of it, or did you know what was going to become of it? In other words, you train in the kitchen, then pretty soon they're going out and being a little more outward going because they built confidence that they can do all these activities by themselves now?
Absolutely. Sometimes we will go into the homes if some people are too afraid to come out of their house. But this way, they can come to the kitchen in our facility. We know exactly what's there because they can't. Sometimes people, when they want to try to get out of it, they'll say, we don't have that. We can't do that. Now they can't get away with it. It's like, no, the stove is marked. We took we have those flat top stoves. A lot of people are afraid of those with vision loss. And so we cut out triangles from a silicone mat and station them around so a person can get the visual/feel of how that stovetop is laid out.
Right.
And now you know where you can position the kettle. And so you just work on getting that confidence with them. And we can use it we have the pre-ETS program, which is for our teenagers. And then of course it goes all up to our working, the work development unit. And then of course we have the senior services. So all of those have that same fear. Doesn't matter what age you have the vision loss. But now you can take them into this kitchen and say, this is a safe place to start. First thing is very simple, is like the little bump dots so that they can actually put those on those flat screens that are a big thing nowadays. So they can at least feel where I'm supposed to push and set the temperature. And then of course I talked about the silicone mat is gonna help. And then of course the talking cooking thermometers. You got the people that wanna check that roast. Is it really hot enough?
Right.
Or, we've got the talking timers, and now of course the Echo and different programs like that help out a lot for people with, tell Alexa to set the time or look up a recipe. That gives them more freedom there as well.
Right. Then, is there any apprehension of somebody who doesn't notice but sets their hand down the flat top when it's, already in operation, and so they kind of burn themselves? I mean, that is something you try to avoid, but it happens.
It does, but I've never had it happen. Most of them are so afraid, they're staying so far back from it. I almost have to get them encouraged, come over here, please, because, and say, I'm here. If anybody's going to get burnt, it's going to be me first. But I've also learned to tell them that we take like a teapot and put water in it and set it on, once you've turned that burner off, set the kettle on that spot. So then you're going to hit the kettle, you're not going to hit the burner. Because that's a big fear, you're right.
Right. Hey, and is there any way that you can expand this to the voc rehab schools? Like, say there's somebody who is enrolled there and they want to learn to cook maybe at the voc rehab school because maybe they want to become a professional chef or a sous chef. Have you had that experience where things have had to be adapted and people want that, and people who are vision impaired want that type of employment?
I've known a few that have done that, and I think that's it. They start out simple like this, so we show them if you can do it here. Think, what would it be like in a commercial kitchen? What are you going to have to do? So we can help them problem solve, and that's where the job coaches and that come in, and they do a lot of job shadowing and following and figure out how are we going to make this possible.
Right. So what type of training as a job coach, not yourself, a job coach you put on the line who is working with a client in the commercial kitchen, what type of training that is special as opposed to a home kitchen?
I think they have to really be aware and that to have a good background in vision loss so they know what is possible and willing to be a problem solver and to look at this before. Some people just walk in and say, you can't do it, you can't do it. I mean, we've had people that were told they couldn't help unload trucks at FedEx, and guess what? There are totally blind people doing that job now. So
Well-
it's like anything. So the job coach has got to be very open to saying, let's see, do I need to make it like, you know, do we need to put some kind of clue on in the flooring that you know when you know, like some of the anti-slip tapes, you know exactly where you are when you're carrying something, because you can't be using a white cane very well if you're carrying some hot pots of liquid or something.
I would have to venture to say, and don't know because I'm not any good in the kitchen, but I would venture to say that once you're in a commercial kitchen, everybody has to realize that they're not at home, they're at the next level. You're now a pro. You're in a restaurant or some type of a commercial cooking situation where you got to be game on, your best game.
Absolutely.
And I think that goes for the job coach. I think it goes for the client, that they've got to know that, you know.
You have to be at your best, and that's, I always tell people, you coming in, they're going to be twice as hard because they're trying to find fault with you. So you, as a blind person or really any disability, you've got to be on top of your game and really know what's going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it can lead to great, wondrous employment, can open up new doors, but the person ordering their breakfast isn't going to care if somebody vision impaired or sight seen cook their breakfast. All they want is a good breakfast.
Absolutely.
But you have to build that confidence within yourself.
I think it's just important to start believing in yourself, and if you're afraid, that's a very normal feeling to have, but it's working past that fear and taking that first step and asking for help.
How do people, if they want to enroll in your program, how do we make contact and what does it take?
Just call State Services for the Blind, and then they will get you assigned to a counselor and into the right, correct unit. Some
Okay.
people are just, you know, they just want to be independent and they've retired now, or they want to get back to a new job, and that's, so it depends which unit you would get put into and assigned a
Do
counselor.
we have an email or phone number for that? Do you know, or a general phone number?
The general phone number would be 651, I believe it's 539-2300.
Okay, 651-539-2300.
Yes.
Charlene Guggisberg, thanks for being on our show. We'll see you again. Come back and see us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. We'll be right back with more Disability Viewpoints right after this. Stay tuned.
Section 504 civil rights legislation is under attack. With me today to talk about this crucial legislation and where we're going to go from here are two individuals that are going to really bring some light to this subject. We've got Steve Schmidt with the Disability Law Center, and we've got David Perry, a father of a person with a disability, but most importantly also is a writer and historian. So welcome both of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hard to believe that we're actually talking about the potential issue of the 504 civil rights legislation of being eliminated. You know, the disability community and the disability leaders worked so hard in the early 70s, massive sit-ins, protests, rallies, people crawling up the steps at the Capitol. I mean, we've got all those pictures. And the thought of this legislation just going away is unspeakable. But let's start with the beginning. Like, what is this 504 civil rights legislation, and what does it do?
Sure. So, as you say, it's a law that predates the ADA back
Right.
the 70s, and it's a pretty simple law. It basically says that entities that receive federal funding cannot discriminate on the basis of disability. And when you think about that, that's a lot, right? Schools, state governments, and then federal government, federal agencies. And so that is the basis of the law. And it's been in place, as I said, before the ADA, and now works in tandem with the ADA as well as the Minnesota Human Rights Act to prevent disability discrimination.
Right.
Certainly schools would be what most people are familiar with, like
Sure.
Section 504 plans that ensure non-discrimination and access for students. state and local governments, town hall, if you need access to, or programming access through a government program. And then, yeah, really any higher education is another example. Any entity that receives federal funding is subject to 504.
Well, so it really can impact almost anyone with a disability, then,
Yes, absolutely.
young or old, and so forth. Now, David, you've been busy writing editorials on a variety of subjects, but you've got a son with a disability. And so what are your thoughts, when you hear 504 is going to go away, how will that impact your family?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people are, one of the things about this particular threat is people have been really unaware of it because it was buried in a specific lawsuit kind of in the middle. And the lawsuit was about an issue that's very divisive, which is whether gender dysphoria can be considered a disability and then protected under 504 and other disability rights, civil rights laws. The Biden administration in May, I think, said it could be, not that it must be, but that it could be. Republicans sued, and that's, I think, fairly normal if problematic. But in the middle of that lawsuit, it just sort of said, I mean, literally these words, and Section 504 is unconstitutional, just buried in the middle of the lawsuit.
Just a little sentence.
Yeah, and it's count 3, right? And even people who, I think, even lawyers, I mean, maybe you are in disability law center, you probably knew, but I know lots of people who are sort of in the profession, in the business, and in our communities, who just were unaware of this threat until really, I think, early February, when suddenly the communities nationally began to activate around it.
Right.
So 504 unconstitutional, just it could be gone. I don't want anyone to panic, but it is a sign of the fight that's coming.
Right. The fight that's coming, it's the storm you can see, and it's not quite here. So, so let's talk further about 504 in terms of if it's not going to be around, what would happen, from the law's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of negative impacts. Obviously, the 504 plans, the protections that it provides in school, if the whole law is declared unconstitutional, those regulations and processes, no one quite knows, would probably go away. ADA Title II, which is what governs state and local governments, that's still with us. So that would still apply, but other protections in 504, other, a federal agency that receives funding, they would no longer have this prohibition against disability discrimination, and therefore if they discriminated against a person with a disability, there would be no recourse.
Right.
So
it's just
very, very scary. Again, like David said, I don't want people to. This isn't happening immediately. The lawsuit is still in its early stages, and there's things we can do, but it is scary that it's even something that we're talking about today.
right,
So.
right. There's no Minnesota. They're not in under 17.
They're not. It's mostly states with Republican-controlled attorney generals. So Iowa, if you have relatives down there, they are involved. But Minnesota is not part of the states that are suing. So.
So that is huge in itself. Don't you think that there is actual lawsuits moving forward in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something to keep an eye on, and I think one thing that national disability advocates are saying, and if folks have relatives in states like Iowa, to call your attorney general's office and say, hey, what are you doing here? Why are you trying to make this very important law that's been around for decades, almost half a century, unconstitutional? So.
Right. So, and I know, David, in your articles, you've even written some harsh sentences saying, all this stress too can impact individuals' lives just in terms of the stress, and it can shorten somebody's lives or worsen their condition.
Yeah, I just had a piece about sort of the collapse of the bipartisan consensus around a very minimal floor of disability rights. I don't want to pretend that everything's been great, because it hasn't been. We've had to fight for everything, and the fights continue. But once you get a law that's 50 years old, there's kind of a consensus that this is a foundation, and we're arguing about what it means. We're arguing about whether, for example, gender dysphoria should count or not whether it should exist. that is really falling apart, and there's an underlying argument. Donald Trump said, after the plane crash, right after he was blaming it on disability hiring, you're saying, these people, they live really short lives, it's really terrible. Well, it's not true. And to the extent that people are living short lives, it's because their supports and services that make lives longer aren't being provided or are being threatened to be taken away or being reduced. This stuff really, it can be the difference between whether you have food, whether you have access to health care, whether you have basic educational rights. And I just want to keep saying, we had this incomplete, partial, but real bipartisan consensus, and we've had it for many decades. And whatever you think we've had, all of that is on the table right now, and we're going to have to defend every bit of it.
Wow. That's interesting how you put that we've got to look at all of it.
Yeah.
If we're going to do any saving of any piece
If
of
they
it.
can put 504s unconstitutional in the middle of a lawsuit and 17, I think, Republican attorneys general can sign on to it, then all of the things are on the table.
Right, everything's on the table. That's even scarier.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but real, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. So, as an attorney, Steve, what are your thoughts when things get put in the very blunt category? Everything's on the table. Where do we kind of go?
Yeah, well, I think, as I mentioned, as far as people who are not attorneys, reaching out to the attorney generals in those states, and then reaching out to your elected officials, even local school district superintendents, all the way up to senators, Congress people, and letting them know this is happening. Because I think, as David, it's kind of a little bit under the radar, and I think there's the power in the people, right? I think the voices of disability community. We've already seen some pushback in some attorney generals starting to say, well, I didn't mean that, when they're getting a bunch of calls from disability rights advocates. And I think that's a really great sign that, despite how, difficult it is right now, the traditional methods of making your voices heard and speaking up still matter, and they still make a difference. So that would be the main.
Now, I know sometimes there's confusions. You hear parents say, oh, my kid's got a 504, oh, my kid's got an IEP. So there's confusion there. Which one of you want to jump in and tackle that of what's the difference, why one or the other, or does it make a difference?
I'll let you take the legal side. I just want to say I have 2 kids, and one has a 504 and one has an IEP.
Okay.
So this is something that, and they are very different. Then IEPs are often the big modifications or the big changes, whereas 504s are smaller. But there's over 100,000 Minnesota kids that have a 504 right now, today. 100,000 kids, so that's a lot.
Wow.
And so as far as the different, they come from different laws. So the IEP is a requirement from the IDEA.
And again, the IEP is we're using acronyms.
Yes.
For the sake of our viewers,
Individualized education
Right.
program, I believe. And then the IDEA would be the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
I'm glad you had to do that.
There we go.
I believe those are both right.
Good
and
job.
And that's really focused on education, as the title of the law says, about your right to get the education, the free and appropriate education that you're entitled to. Section 504 is more about disability access and is non-discrimination. So they're both important, but different, cover different things for a student with a disability.
Right. Okay.
As a parent, the 504 can be a pretty minor set of small things, and there aren't a lot of meetings. There isn't a lot of paperwork. It's mostly just handled over email. And IEP, that restructures the whole educational experience for you, for the child, for the big team of people. It's a much more intensive. And one of my kids needed a 504 and one needed an IEP, and I'm glad
Really?
both were there. I'm glad both were there for my family.
Wow.
I'd like them to be there for the next generation of kids too.
Right. Well, see, that's just it. If they're not going to be there, what happens to these kids?
Yeah.
Yeah, they won't get the services they need, right?
Right.
And I think we pass these laws for a reason, to make sure that kids with disabilities get the services they need to be successful, and so that's why they're so
Right, and that's
important
just
to
the
maintain.
beginning, so that they can go on to be successful adults.
Yes.
So that's all huge. So as we're winding down here with this conversation, where do we need to go so that all of us can try to stop, prevent, or slow it down in some capacity start with you, Steve. What?
Yeah, I mean, I think raising awareness, I mean, this is a federal lawsuit down in Texas, but I think, Disability Advocacy Day at the Capitol is coming up,
Sure.
March 25th. I think, raising that along with a lot of the other issues that people with disabilities in this state are facing is important. And then just, keeping an eye on it and making your voice heard when the time comes. So.
Right, absolutely. Is there any website or a phone number that people can, anyone to call or to look up if they want more information on this subject?
I can give our mylegalaid.org,
Yeah.
our website. We can put up some stuff.
Great.
There's a national organization called DREDIF that has done a lot of good work on explaining this in terms people can understand. So yeah, we can get that information out.
Okay. And final thoughts here as a dad with a kid with a disability?
I want everyone who doesn't think they're part of the disability community to look again, to really think about how these laws and programs impact the lives and the lives of people they love, and then get ready to fight for them.
Fabulous. Both of you, I think this might have helped shed some light on what it is, 504, the civil rights legislation, and hopefully where we're going to be needing to go in the future. So thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having us.
And we're going to be right back after these messages.
Does it for this edition of Disability Viewpoints. I'd like to thank Charlene Guggisberg from DEED for coming out today. There's a lot of interesting things we learned about employment for the disabled, about cooking for the vision impaired at home or in a restaurant. So we hope that everybody learned something, and if you want to get a hold of DEED for any reason, we've given you that information. And Joan, thanks for being here today. Your guests were certainly interesting.
Right, absolutely. The discussion of the possible elimination of the 504 civil rights legislation is a huge issue for us, and so special thanks goes out to Stephen Schmidt from the Disability Law Center, and then also David Perry, parent of a son with a disability, who's also a writer. It's done some fabulous editorials. We thank him for coming on. Like I said, it was a good discussion, and we have to continue to fight to keep our legislative.
And as Section 504 has been around a long time, as it changes, tune into us, and we'll keep you updated on it, and we'll go from there. There's still stuff going on down at the House and Senate. We hope you'll stay tuned for that too. For the entire team at Disability Viewpoints, I'm Mark Hughes. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.